So, let's resume.
This little pub, and we came in from both doors. And Bill looked, and there was nowhere to go. We were coming in the only exit, you know. And he's over in the corner like that, and Elvis then just took whipped cream and just buried him in the corner of whipped cream there, man. And then we just left. But it was all in fun. It was all in fun. Elvis loved the island. Hawaii was one of his favorite places to go. We went there several times over the years. And he used to love to stay at the Cocoa Palms Hotel because that's where he'd stayed when he did the film Blue Hawaii. He loved the Hawaiian ceremonies at dinner time. To announce dinner, the hotel set signal fires among the trees. And also, while he was there, the Navy always put their admiral's barge at his disposal. What not many people knew is that Elvis had given a special concert to help pay for the Arizona Memorial in Pearl Harbor. Just beneath the memorial is the sunken battleship. Whenever he went to Hawaii, he liked to take people out to visit the memorial. Elvis was resting in his dressing room right after the Aloha from Hawaii television special, which, by the way, was seen by 2 billion people around the world. One of the guys came in and said there was someone to see Elvis, and it was Jack Lord. Well, now, Hawaii 5-0 and Jack Lord, Elvis watched them every time they were on, so that was one of his favorites. So Jack came back there, and man, it was just like instant friendship, you know? And Jack was talking to Elvis, and he said, you know, I don't think I've ever heard such dramatic music in my life. And Elvis said, Charlie, get this man a seat. We don't want to lose him, you know? And then the next week, Jack and Marie, his wife, invited Elvis and all the guys over for dinner at their apartment. No, once Linda Lee had come up to see Elvis at his suite there, her dad was doing a recording session one time, and he needed a tenor singer. And she said, well, Charlie Hodge works for Elvis, and he used to be with Fog River Boys. So Wakely had me come over and do a recording with him, you know, doing some vocal backup with this quartet he had. And then George Ritchie, who's married to Tammy Wynette now, George came because he was my piano player when I went in the Army with the Fog River Boys. And George came to me about reorganizing the Foggies, and I was getting kind of tired of sitting around movie sets, so I talked to Elvis about me going on the road with the quartet and working some in Nevada. And he said, well, go ahead, you know, just come back in and help me do the sessions and everything. When you're not working, you come back here as home. Okay. So I had the quartet there, and then the quartet broke up, and I stayed with Wakely up to 1966, working along with Louis Prima, Sam Butera and the Witnesses, Harry James, you know, the orchestra. Harry James was my keynote playing buddy. And a lot of stars I was working with there in Nevada, and kind of learning, I guess, what I needed to know to lay out a show for Elvis. Because in 1966, I decided I really didn't have any time that I was giving to Charlie Hodge. Because it was either working with Wakely and doing shows, or coming in and doing something with Elvis, and I had no time for me. So I decided I'd leave the Wakely show and just work for Elvis. And at that time, we weren't touring, see, we were just doing the, you know, movies and things like that. So I came back, and then they started this thing of getting ready for the 68 comeback. And Elvis talked to me, and he said, you know, Charlie, I'm a little worried because I've done all these movies and everything, and said, I've forgotten everything, and I think I may have lost it. And I said, well, no, you hadn't. I said, it's just a matter of working on it again. And Elvis and I started working on his voice. The guys would go to sleep maybe 1:30 in the morning, and Elvis and I would start, and 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, we'd still be sitting around the piano, just working on his voice control, his placement, and getting his projection going good, and, you know, learning to support his tones real good. And then we did the 68 comeback, and then they started talking about going to Nevada and working there. Well, we had to start thinking about what he could do, you know, because Elvis used to just go out on stage on, with he and Scotty and Bill, and they'd do, on those one-nighters and everything, they'd do maybe 15, 20 minutes because there were other people on the show, and that'd be about it. Well, now we were going to have to do an hour show. So it was up to me then to start pacing it. So once we started rehearsal and everything, Joe Esposito would always time all the numbers and keep a list of them. And we would rehearse in one night. We'd rehearse as many as 40, 50 numbers. And people say, well, how do you get a show out of that? You got to rehearse a show. Well, what we did is what we rehearsed, I took and made a show out of it.
When Elvis would start to do something, Charlie, you take up Elvis started singing a song that nobody knew, and Charlie knew that we did, so he would point at the stamps and even give us the chord to sing with, to sing the background with Elvis.
Charlie always stood there and supported Elvis, and of course encouraged him. Elvis always had to have a lot of encouragement. Because, you know, it's real funny. Elvis didn't think he could dance. He didn't think he could play a piano or guitar. And how many times I heard him say, man, I can't sing this. But Charlie and, of course, the Jordanaires and various ones were there to tell him, yes, you can, and you're going to, and you can do a good job, and the results came out very great.
So that became my job, to lay out the shows. And subject always to Elvis's approval, of course. And so once we started working in Nevada, we'd do a rehearsal, and I'd lay out a show, and Elvis said, yeah, that'd be good. Then maybe later on, about halfway through, Charlie said, do you think we could do such and such song, something else rehearsal? Yeah, we can put it right here. He said, well, let's put that in there tonight. So put that in, and then he would decide he didn't want to lose that other number. See? So then I would tell him, well, they're about the same tempo, so talk between the songs. And then people won't notice it when you go back into it, it's the same tempo. Because he'd be doing a song and he wouldn't want to throw it away. Over the years, with songs that he did on stage or songs that he planned to do on stage, we had over 500 orchestrations that he could have done at any time. If he'd just called it out, the music was there.
Charlie Hodge, I think Charlie had a whole lot to do with Elvis's stage performance. I don't mean Elvis's personal performance. I'm talking about the production on the stage, where the band was, what songs. And Charlie, if Elvis drew a blank for a moment, says Charlie, where are he? Elvis would throw out a song like, well, Under Review. Charlie knew the tempo of the music, where Elvis may get involved with the audience, or Elvis may be making a speech, introducing the band. Charlie always had the song list there, and they knew the tempo of the songs and what songs would go over at certain situations. And so Elvis would look to Charlie, and Charlie would, under his breath, you wouldn't hear him, but he would call out a song title.
I'd have to say that Charlie Hodge was, outside of Elvis, the most important man in the Elvis Presley show.
Well, one by one they came. I mean, the best of the best. We had Jerry Sheff on bass, Larry Mahoverak on piano, John Wilkerson on rhythm guitar, and the great James Burton on lead guitar, and that fantastic Ronnie Tutt on drums. And I took the acoustic guitar and I sang with Elvis. Larry only made the first engagement for us, and then Glenn Hardin joined us with his piano after the next opening. Elvis then called in the Imperials Quartet and the Sweet Inspirations. And one of the Sweet Inspirations, it was 4 of them at that time, was Cissy Houston, the mother of Whitney Houston. And we began to plan the show. You know, we went and we caught Barbara Streisand, who was kicking off the first month at the New International Hotel. And this is the same stage that Elvis would be on, you see. So he began looking at it to see, it was such a big stage that you looked alone out there. Barbara looked like she was by herself. And he wanted to have people around him, you know, like, so we had the big orchestra. And he got this idea from going to see Barbara and Tom Jones, who, you know, Tom and Elvis had been friends for just years. And seeing these stages and what Tom would wear and everything, he decided what he wanted to wear and kind of how the lighting should be. And from watching all these shows, see, he could get an idea of what was happening in Las Vegas today. Elvis decided that he didn't think he'd feel comfortable in a tuxedo. So what he did is, you know, he was in karate, and in karate they have an outfit there where it's called a gi. So he and Priscilla designed kind of a modernized gi. And that way he could have freedom of movement on stage and do some of those great moves he did when he sang the song. We started planning what we were going to do in 1969 before we opened in Las Vegas. And at first Elvis didn't want to use his guitar. He thought he'd just come out without it. And we sat down and we talked about it. And I said, well, gee, you know, everybody's used to seeing you. Like your first album had that picture of you and guitar on it. And maybe we can use it the first 2 numbers and then lose it. And so he said, yeah, that'll work. So come out, and then different things developed from that, like him hitting me in the stomach with the guitar. Nothing of that was ever really planned. And then he used to like just hand me the guitar after he finished the second number. And then he got to where he'd kind of lob it over to me, you know? And then he started doing these karate workout things where it just going in different directions and everything. And I'm waiting back there, where's it going, where's it going? You know, and then one night, instead of turning around and lobbing it to me, he threw it over his head like that. Well, from then on, I caught the guitar. I never missed it one time. But if you can see the later videos where I'm catching the guitar, the orchestra actually had a period they put there. They waited, and when you saw me catch the guitar, Joe Gershio had the orchestra go, dot, you know, down, you know, as I called it, big chord. So those things just developed. No, nothing was ever planned. Everything worked off of Elvis and became part of the show. And the rehearsals before the opening were marathons. And the intensity, excitement was building, and everybody felt it. We'd rehearse all night long sometimes. Somebody asked me one time, you know, like what all I did on stage for Elvis, and it was a number of things. Like I laid out the shows, you know, subject to Elvis's approval, of course. And if he wanted to change a song during the show, then it was my job to get it lined back up so that the orchestra could keep their music, you know, in line. Because the way the music's laid out that way, you know. And then another thing I do is like Elvis, like on the, you know, the way he worked and everything, at the end of a song sometimes, he'd just be totally out of breath. You know, so I'd help hold his note for him, so if he's out of breath, I'd be hanging on to it. And then to help me, in case I gave out of breath, there was Ed Enert with the Stamp Quartet. He'd be holding the note too, so Elvis was covered, you know.
Charlie was always there to hit the high note in case Elvis didn't quite make it or didn't want to make it. Charlie was always there to hand him a scarf and to hit that high note if Elvis wanted him to. And it seemed like Charlie always knew when to do it.
Somebody was asking me, like I said, about one of these one time. They said, well, you gave Elvis his scarves and water. You laid the show out. You told him what was coming up next. You were more or less Elvis's stage director. I said, well, I never thought about it that way. I was never given that title, but I guess I was.
Charlie was sort of Elvis's go-between. He was Elvis's stage musical director, even though there was a big band director. But Charlie really was the guy who told Elvis's band, like, Elvis is going to work this new song in tonight. We're going to rehearse for it, and he wants you guys to do this, this, and this. Charlie had a great deal to do with Elvis's stage performance, but people are not aware of that.
What happened tonight, July 26th, can only be described as a desert explosion. It was awesome, a cosmic event. It was pure Elvis. It was built on dramatics. I mean, we would have these beautiful introductions and these big dramatic endings. Bum, 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 wow, you know. So it's built on dramatics, and Elvis loved that. He loved it. I think that's one of the things he used to, when he used to it, and he was a little boy in Memphis, and he used to go down to Overton Square and listen to the orchestras play the symphony music with those big endings and everything. And then when that developed into where he had these type of big endings and arrangements in his own songs, I think it inspired him and gave him more energy, you know, to have these big things with him now that he observed as a child and admired. If you ever talk with anyone who was there for any of those concerts, they'll tell you they laughed, they cried, they stood. They experienced something you do only once in a lifetime. On that opening night in Vegas in 1969, boy, there were so many big just superstars, you know, that came to see Elvis, you know. And there was a whole booth section there down front, and there was nothing but stars there, you know. Cary Grant was there, and he came backstage after the show that night, and he said, oh, I got to tell you this. Cary Grant's one of those beautiful people that when he sees beauty, whether it's an art form or a painting, a statue, he gets tears in his eyes. He gets emotional, you know. And they said that the whole time he was in the booth back there watching Elvis' performance, that he just wiped his eyes through the whole thing. He thought it was so beautiful. And he came backstage and he said, Elvis, are you going to take this show on the road? He said, yes, sir, we plan to. He said, oh, that's good. The people should see you. He said, it's so beautiful. And Yul Brynner came backstage one night. And it was that magnificent, big, manly voice of his. You know, he said, Elvis, thank you for the enormous amount of pleasure you've given us this evening. Just very elegant, you know. And Sammy Davis Jr., of course, every time we played Vegas, I think, he came and he wouldn't sit in the booth. He wanted to be right next to the stage at one of those tables. So, like he said, I can see the man work, you know. He was there the first night we did Thus Spake Zarathustra, what everybody calls 2001 Space Odyssey. Elvis, that was Elvis's idea, by the way. He went for a drive one day, which a lot of people didn't know he could go out anywhere by himself, but he went out in his Stutz Black Hawk, and he came back and he came up to me and said, Charlie, he said, do you remember that theme on the 2001 Space Odyssey? I said, yeah. He said, that'd be a great opening. We had 37 pieces on stage in Las Vegas. The only thing is, on the road, we could only carry the brass. We couldn't carry the reeds and the strings. The only time we ever used the reeds and the strings on location like that was when we recorded at Madison Square Garden. And then it was conducive there to use the strings and the reeds and the brass. But the whole thing was nice. Elvis would want me to play games with him. He didn't want to look like he was picking on me. Like he'd come over sometime and he would like take a drink of water and then throw water on me, and then he'd say just over his shoulder, throw some on me. So it looked like that we were playing with each other, and it wasn't just him picking on me, which I would do. And sometimes I'd take a kick at him just as he walked off and just barely miss him, you know, something like that. Those things that weren't planned, you know, like it's like Elvis coming over at the end of the show, and we'd been on stage like 45 minutes or 55 minutes. He'd say, what's next on? And I'd tell him what's next. He said, I don't feel like doing that. What's next? I'd tell him that. I don't feel like doing that. I said, well, look, we're already done 55 minutes. Do funny how time slips away, and let's go home. He said, okay. One night we were playing an engagement somewhere. I don't know where it was. But Elvis saw these two young ladies down at the edge of the stage, and they had a birthday cake that they had prepared for him. And Elvis got down, and he was thanking them. And when he looked up, he had that look in his eyes. He's up to something, you know? And I said, uh-oh, here it comes. In front of 18,000 people, here it comes. And he did. As soon as the thank him turned.
Man. So yeah, I learned a whole lot right about now, because I thought that Charlie Hodge was just, number one, a good friend, a loyal friend, but just a dude who's getting the water and the scarves, and I knew he helped out with the vocals from time to time, but to sit here and hear it in depth like that, it makes a whole lot of sense. And I always see them messing with each other. And the guitar thing, I always wondered if he ever dropped one of those, and he didn't drop one of them. But yeah, they had that kind of friendship where they could probably finish each other's sentences if they really wanted to. But yeah, so Charlie Hodge was the one to sit here and put the show together. We're gonna do bridge here. We're gonna do funny how time slips away here. We're gonna do a little gospel in this section right here. We're gonna do this. We're gonna do that. I never would have guessed that. I never would have guessed that. But I always said it looked like Charlie Hodge was the most loyal. And to even have, because there's like, when I hear JD speak, I listen. Because JD looked like a non-bullshitter. He gonna tell her for what it is. And when he even said Charlie was the main man, I believe it. I believed it before that. But just to have that JD with the stamp on it, get it? JD and the stamps? Anywho, just had that stamp on it. It just meant, yep, Charlie's the one. And I'm glad that he had that go-to person from the Army up until, you know what I'm saying? I'm pretty sure he needed that, wanted that, and they had a hell of a relationship. So that was very interesting to watch, though. But hopefully you enjoy this right here. Drop me a comment. Let me know what you think.